However, the closeness to Pharisees does not prevent the Gospels from highlighting Jesus' polemic against them. Just the opposite. As some scholars suggested, the polemic is an indication of involvement of the initial synoptic tradition with the Pharisaic circles and familiarity with them. Internal disputes seem to be the most passionate. What are the main points of contention? The first one, as we saw, was the difference in Torah interpretation. Another could be Jesus being a miracle worker. That is how he is remembered in the Gospels. I mentioned other so-called Hasidians or pietists, that subgroup of the Pharisaic movement involved in miraculous acts, who, like Jesus, had troubles with other sages, being sometimes accused of undue pressuring God or even sorcery. You are advised to read Samuel Safrai's article detailing evidence concerning pietists, which is available on the site. It seems that performing miracles, that foundational element of Jesus' life story, was somewhat problematic for the gospel narrative itself, as it did not easily lend itself to be invested with a clear messianic meaning. Here is one informative example of how the gospel copes with the issue. I read from Luke chapter 4. And now, when the sun was setting, those who had any that were sick with various diseases brought them to him, to Jesus, and he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. And demons also came out of many, crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Messiah. So the memory of healings and exorcism performed by Jesus becomes here secondary to the claim that even demons were aware of Jesus' messiahship, but were not allowed to reveal it because the time was not ripe yet. There could be other points of tension too. The classical example of the collation of closeness and conflict is found in Matthew 23. It starts as in Matthew 5:20, "Unless your righteousness exceeds that of scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven," with Jesus' identification with Pharisaic interpretation of the Torah. I read from Matthew 23, starting from verse 1. "Then said Jesus to the crowds and to his disciples, 'The Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so practice and observe whatever they tell you.' As an archaeological finds in Galilee suggest, the seat of Moses was not only a figure of speech, but also the name of a stone chair where the rabbinic sage who interpreted the Torah during the service in the synagogue was sitting. We are now at the site of the ancient Capernaum synagogue, where there could have been such seat of Moses. One notes, however, that immediately after that strong endorsement of Pharisaic exegesis comes a powerful criticism, taking the rest of the chapter in Matthew, with the recurrent phrase of "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." And I read starting from verse 3. "So practice and observe whatever they, Pharisees, tell you, but not what they do, for they preach but do not practice. And they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by men, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues, in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by men. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." Scholars long ago recognized that this theme of Pharisaic hypocrisy would feature prominently in rabbinic sources, where one finds a motif of 7 types of Pharisees, among whom only 2 are quote-unquote true Pharisees, while the rest are tainted by different sorts of hypocrisy, meaning fulfilling the commandments not for the right reasons of fear of God and love of God. You are recommended to read the article of Moshe Weinfeld on the charge of hypocrisy in Matthew 23 on the side. What we find in the Gospel may be viewed, therefore, as early evidence of such intra-Pharisaic self-criticism, which of course does not annul its polemical character. To properly evaluate the intensity of this polemic, one should compare it with much more vicious polemic directed against Pharisees in the Pesher Nahum scroll from Qumran. In the scroll, not their hypocrisy is criticized, but the Pharisaic understanding of the Torah itself is dismissed completely. It is called their sleazy interpretation, or even fraudulent teaching, Talmud Shikram, their lying Talmud, and lying tongue and perfidious lip, with which Pharisees, whom the Pesher compare with a seditious prostitute, cause destruction to whole cities and families. The people of Qumran obviously did not subscribe to the idea that Pharisees were the most important group around. The gospel stance is clearly much milder. In other words, Jesus is portrayed as much less estranged from Pharisees than the people behind Pesher Nahum. Later Christian tradition would, however, rethink the matter and view Pharisees as arch enemies.